Today is Monday, July 21st, 2025. My name is Cecilia Ballí, and I'm interviewing Tony Diaz for the Oral History Project as part of the Macondo Writers Workshop Oral History Project. We're on the campus of Trinity University in San Antonio, Texas, and it is the summer gathering of the Macondo Writers Workshop. Thank you, Tony, for agreeing to this interview. This interview is being recorded, and the unedited copy will be housed in the Nettie Benson Library Archives and Special Collections at the University of Texas in Austin. Please know that if there is anything you do not wish to discuss, I will honor your wishes. Also, if you need to stop to use the facilities, please let us know. If there are topics you wish to discuss and I haven't asked about them, please do bring them up. So with that, we'll go ahead and start. Tony, let's start with growing up in Chicago, which you're very proud of, in the south side of Chicago. Can you tell me a little bit about your childhood and your family?
So I am the first kid in my immediate family that grew up in Chicago. But that's a big deal because previous to that, my parents and all the kids had been migrant workers and picking crops in Texas. And part of that work means they would follow the crop up and down the country, going up to Michigan, and they would pass through Chicago. And that means that my siblings were kids who should have been in third grade, but I remember my sister Lupia, my favorite sister, that's official, so I'm documenting that. Te quiero mucho, Lupia. She would tell me stories about waking up at 5 a.m. and going to pick blueberries. So the big difference for me, though, was that my father, by the time I came around, he was working at Inland Steel first, which was in Indiana, part of the Industrial Revolution, and then Conrail, which was in Chicago, as a track man. And the reason that's such a big deal is because by the time I grew up, we had a fixed address. My father made enough money on one job where he could pay for me to go to a Catholic school, and I knew we had a roof over our head. My mom didn't have to pick. Those days were over, and I could study. And that was a big deal for my dad. My dad would tell me in Spanish that the reason he would break his back is that so I could grow up and use my head and work with my brains and not work hard like he did. And I think that was impactful for me on one level, but I would see throughout my life, like there's two moments that I can remember vividly where the past would peek in. I remember my mom, who didn't go to school, that was the other effect of being migrant workers. My mother and father didn't get to go to school. Although my mom was brilliant, she taught herself how to read in Spanish and, would be entertaining. So she would hold us spellbound in front of the house in Chicago, on the south side of Chicago. And she'd tell stories, the family would gather around her. She had a gift for that. But I remember when we would all leave, she'd say, "Hasta las otras pizcas," and everybody would laugh, So then I was a little kid, and I was always picking up these lines. I think I was studying her rhetorical approaches. I'm like, man, she's got a power there. And then at some point, with the right timing, I learned to say, as everybody was leaving, "Hasta las otras pizcas," and they'd all start cracking up, right? And then later on, I would realize what that meant. In English, it means until the next picking season. And it dawned on me later in life that, oh my goodness, these families would convene, pick, survive, help each other get through this, and then leave that farm. But they knew they'd see each other when the season coincided again. And it was just like mind-blowing for my family to still get it, for my mom to joke about it, and for me to just kind of be glib about it. But then later on, it profoundly impacted me. I feel like, holy cow. And then I think when I was in high school, So my folks did invest in me going to a Catholic high school as well, um, which south side of Chicago and that era, that was kind of like an elite private education at the time. Smaller classes, rigorous courses, appropriate violence to us from teachers so we would behave. That was the pedagogy at the time. Sit down and shut up. However, I remember in high school, we had a course, social studies, and we had a workbook called Social Problems. And I remember leafing through the workbook, and there was a section on child labor. And I'm like, my brothers and sisters were working as kids. I'm like, I'm not going to bring this up. Homelessness. And I was like, holy cow, my folks didn't have a fixed address. And it really dawned on me that, oh my goodness, my folks, they had struggled profoundly at that time. And then I think that's why I really took the role of education profoundly. But I had a certain skill as well. I think I get it from my mom. And then also I saw the power of language. So the other important thing I think about growing up on the south side of Chicago, by the White Sox, the great White Sox, was that we grew up right by Comiskey Park. So that's why that's a big deal as well. I think for me, it was a polyglot. So at the time, the community was rich Italian and Irish. It also reveals something about my father because a lot of Mexicanos would go and live in Little Village, La Villita, or Pilsen. And my dad went to Bridgeport. And when he could finally buy a house, he wanted a house in that neighborhood. And what I can ascertain, we were among the first Mexican families. I made my family Mexican-American. So we weren't Chicanos yet. I wasn't Chicano yet. I didn't have the knowledge to be Chicano yet. I was on that road. But he picked that neighborhood because he heard the mayors were from that neighborhood. And we actually lived across the street from Richie Daley Jr., who would wind up becoming mayor. His father was mayor. It was the middle of the Democratic machine at the time. And I think what happened is that a Lithuanian gentleman owned the house. According to my dad, I kind of pieced it together. And he sold to my father, and we were like the first Mexican family there. But I knew that they had all these tensions, like at different points. It was mind-blowing to see. I remember some of the Italian kids, their parents would be like, hey, don't talk to the Irish families. I'd be watching this. Sometimes I walk in, nice household, and they'd be like, you're Italian, right? And I go, no, I'm Mexican. They're like, they'd be shocked, but my name was Antonio Anthony. Like they could kind of get it. We were Catholic. And then also there were tensions between the Lithuanians and the Italians. A lot of the Irish families had become police officers. The politicians, it was Richie Daley. They become mayors and whatnot. And I remember, too, that the Lithuanians didn't get along with some of them. So I always wondered if the Lithuanian gentleman sold to my dad just to spite the neighbors. I don't know. But I also remember that my dad picked that neighborhood because he wanted me and to be injected into this system, this ecosystem. He wouldn't use that word. And when other Mexicanos would say, Don Antonio, ¿por qué vive allá? And my dad would say in Spanish, like, I didn't come to live in a little village. I come to live by the port. I came here for my son to succeed in this world. And it's mind-blowing because at that time then, I had to develop this facility to navigate all these different worlds. And it was clear to me the power of language because my job was to translate. My job clearly was to translate English from the outside world to the inside world. But I learned at a breakneck pace. So I think I talk a lot about growing up in Chicago because it was a lot of the families. Some of the Italian kids were doing the same thing. And we could get along. I think for those reasons, we were all Catholic. I think I saw a statistic or legend that South Side of Chicago had the most Catholic churches per capita at that time, which defined who you were, and of course dictated the Catholic school. So for me, it was formational in that I got to see how communities organized. I joke and I say in my book, the tip of the pyramid, cultivating community cultural capital. I say that everybody on the South Side of Chicago appeared to be, either in a union, political party or a gang. Okay, in some short. And at the time, gang didn't mean what would become later fueled by the drug trade and arms trade, etc. It was a little bit different then. But I grew up with union members, the Catholic Church, and you were from that neighborhood.
How did the church and religion shape your identity or your life?
So my mom era católica. Not only was church standard for her, and of course I was in Catholic school, so it was standard there too. But she would also say the rosaries weekly, and sometimes I would sit with her as she did the rosary. Even as a grown man, I remember, in my 20s, she'd be saying the rosary. I'd be lifting weights. She'd say, "Stay up with me as I say the rosary." I'd say, "Okay," I'd be lifting weights. And I would hear her pray for me. And it'd be powerful. She'd be like, "I know my son is a writer." She was my best agent. She was appealing to the universe for my writing career. Please help him with his books and his writing. But I think it was fundamental, though, because it also helped in many different. So it was a passport to Bridgeport. So even if people couldn't figure me out because I was Mexican, Mexican American. My name was Tony. Some folks maybe thought I was Italian, maybe, or I got along with them. My English was like from the South Side of Chicago. I spoke great English to them. I sounded like them, right? Well, because I was translating my whole life, and I was good at it. I had a gift for it, but I could navigate it because I knew their values. I grew up with a bunch of them, but also I learned that you belong to these pockets. So you were definitely defined by being from that part of Chicago, that neighborhood, that church. And it wasn't just you. In Chicago, you weren't dealing with one person. You kind of had to decode who all the folks they were connected with. And the Catholic education was huge. So that the money my father spent to send me to the Catholic school really was an investment in education, which now, looking back, they were small classes. I do believe fundamentally in bilingual education programs. They are important, but there was not one on the South Side of Chicago at that time, which again, because I had a certain abilities, I could navigate that quickly and I would be rewarded for it. So that means that, at the Catholic school South Side of Chicago, the pedagogy was like, all you monsters, shut up, sit down, Antonio, come here and translate. And I'd be like, I felt great because I'm like, all right, you little monsters, you stay here. I'm gonna go with the adults and get some work done. And the Catholic school too, if I remember right, during grammar school, it was just two Mexican kids, me, and I remember one young lady. And I think too, it fit into the mission of, the outreach of the Catholic Church. And, there was a common ground because that was some of the rules, and I was able to learn that, embrace that. Obviously, my mom, too, was formed by that. It was that discipline and belief in that. My father didn't follow it as much. And I think it was formative for those reasons. And then also part of that good education. I am not practicing to the extent I was at that time, spiritually, probably different. But still, I am impressed and amazed by the power of the religion, and I'd be foolish to say it didn't form me and impact me at that time.
You mentioned that you had your mother's skills, which I'm assuming you're talking about her storytelling skills, and you were natural with language. Did you already have an inkling that you were going to be a writer or that you were drawn to writing in some way?
Yes, and my mom didn't go to school, but she taught herself how to read. So she was brilliant, and she would read all the time. When she said the rosary, she had the missalettes. She had hymnos. She would sing hymnos, so she would read all that. She would read the newspapers out loud every day. She says she didn't know English, but that was part of her bit, I think, because she would throw out English now and then with perfect timing. So she had a facility for storytelling, which now I would say rhetoric, how language worked, and great timing. But she was really great with people. So I think she had that natural talent, and I think I had a natural talent for language. I believed in reading because I could see the impact on her. And then I think from both of them and my family, it was the discipline. So even early on, I remember vividly, I would go to my teachers and say, I couldn't finish my homework for this day or that. I would do the homework, like above and beyond. I was a big kid too, so I could also handle myself. I don't like talk about like that too much because I think Chicanos, Mexican Americans are portrayed as violent, even when we're not, and it's hard to convey us as intellectuals. On South Side Chicago, I can handle myself, right? Which means that I'm like, hey fool, hey, hey guy, I'm reading a book. You want to mess with me, or want to let me read? Like, let me get my business done here. And I also think that with my mom modeling all that, I also thought, you know what? She didn't go to school. I'm going to school. I'm going to get things done. I should also add that with my father, when I finished college, I'll flash forward to college though, I had the audacity to try many things because I'd always be like, finishing college later, I'm like, I had no student debt. I had $2,000 in my bank account, and I had a Buick LeSabre. I spoke English and I had a degree. I'm like, I'm invincible. Like my dad was raising kids at that age in a country he didn't know. He couldn't speak the language. So I think that formation was early on in there. But I was rewarded for speaking English well, be it praised by my mother and father, and of course, being the last male of a Mexican American family, I was the center of my mom's universe. I was shocked to find out I wasn't the center of other people's universes. Right? I felt supported, loved. I felt I could change the world, but they told me I would change the world. They also said I would take care of them. They're like, you're going to take care of us when I'm older. You're taking care of us,
As you change the world. How did you decide that you were going to college and where to go to college?
And I should point out too, I knew I wanted to be a writer. As early as third grade, I would write stories about my father. And I remember even writing some amazing tale called the Cold Chicago Winter. I also remember my first publication. I think it was was it fifth grade? I'm trying to remember the exact grade, but I had written a poem, and my teacher loved it, and she put it in the weekly newsletter. And at that time, I should mention this for younger viewers. You couldn't take a picture of it. You couldn't print it on a Xerox machine. There were Duraga type machines that had a fluid that smelled strong. It was like, I think you could. The equivalent would be people smelling glue or markers, if that's still a thing. And they would print it on this blotchy purple ink. And the big deal was that it had the hot lunch menu. So I remember that week under the hot lunch menu, my poem appeared. And it was amazing because then all the teachers were talking to me, other parents were talking to me. I remember a parent coming up to me saying, Antonio, I didn't know you were so smart. I'm like, right. Teachers from other grades said, I can't wait to have you in my class. And at that point, I'm like, I'm on to something. And I'm like, this is fascinating. And at that time, I was also, I would like, for the record, I was good at decoding and coding. And here's what I mean. I'd figure it out and hacked language. English, Southside Chicago English, and Tejano Chicago Spanish, and math. So I was also very good at math. I loved math. And to me, the same thing. My sons are advanced mathematicians. One of my sons a rocket scientist. I will not debate this with him because he says it's not accurate. Unless he's in a good mood, he'll say it's accurate. I always felt numbers and words were the same thing, right? Just a different code. However, my English teacher was wonderful to me, and the English teachers were amazing to me, publishing my work and whatnot. The English teachers were mean to me, and I deserved it. I deserved it. I was talked too much, had too much audacity, but the math teachers were meaner to me. So I really excelled on the English side and pushed that. I was set. I thought my education would end in high school, which is what my father thought. So he wanted us to live on the south side of Chicago. He had heard that the mayors all went to De La Salle High School, which was the Catholic high school. So he clearly said, well, all right, you know what? This kid goes to this Catholic school, goes to De La Salle High School, and he's going to be up there, he's going to be successful. And that's the path. I thought that was the path as well. And I remember, too, in 8th grade, another English teacher, Mrs. Buckley, I do remember her name. I'm trying to remember the other English teachers' names. I apologize for not remembering that. So shout out and love to all English teachers from all eras. But Mrs. Buckley helped me write a scholarship application. Someone from the south side of Chicago, he had made money in the stock and did a scholarship fund. But I remember winning one of those, which was a huge deal because they gave you cash. I think I won the top guy won $1,000. I got $500 cash. I'm like, what the heck? This is awesome, And I remember it was a one line. If I can is the spirit of Chicago, I have is the spirit of Bridgeport. Some awesome line like that, right? But I said I'm going to go to high school, and that was set. I think sometime around sophomore year, I realized, okay, if these seniors are the intellectual height of civilization, I think that's not the case. And then college counselors, teachers would gravitate towards me too, right? I am, I wanted to be an A student. I could be the tough kid and the smart kid. I'm like, how do you get an A? Tell me how to get the A, and I get the A. I might be a wise guy or crack jokes in class, but also if I got engaged, I'd be the one answering questions. So teachers, I think, then could say, okay, here's the kid that's gonna get the A, and so they would help me out. I say all that because then they started giving me materials about applying to college. I do want to give a shout out to affirmative action. Colleges started imagining me as an applicant. And I started realizing, okay, I need to go to the university. And I started having to tell my dad and mom about that, which they had not anticipated.
How did they respond?
I had to educate them. I kind of felt that they're like, more school, mas. But again, I made my case over time, just saying, listen, this is how much money people make with a high school degree. Here are the jobs. To really continue, I'm going to have to go to the college and the university. And that meant many things. not just the financial part, but also the possibility that I might leave Chicago, which for them was heartbreaking. On many reasons, I think what folks may not understand is for our generation, um, living at home, even when you're a kid, meant that you had work to do. Like, I was a translator. I was like their consultant. They paid me in tortillas, hugs, and love, and education. But I was a consultant. My job was to, you know, translate. And I really need this to hit home for folks that don't understand. I mean, on a daily basis, when we're translating, the simple rewards were I haggled with the butcher, and my reward was that steak. And I had to play an influential role because if I botched it up, if I translate literally what my mom was saying to this grown man, we're getting kicked out of there. And if I translate literally what this guy was saying, my mom would throw money at him, like, get out of here, right? I had to balance it because I wanted the steak. So there were high stakes, to use a bad pun. Other days, you're a grammar school kid and you got to translate a contract for everything from a washing machine to a car. And you're like, okay, if I screw this up, this is bad, right? So it's like to live at home is to have a real role for these folks that count on you. And part of it, I think people just think it's just the love, which is totally there. But they also know, well, how will we fend for ourselves and these other things if I leave? And then the cost. Hey, what's this university life going to cost and whatnot? So I had to go through those misgivings. But at some point, because my mother and father wanted the best for me, they did come around and say, we get it. You got to go to the university.
And how did you choose DePaul?
So at the time, it was peak affirmative action. I was an A student. I did really well on the PSAT, the SAT, and ACT. So I was getting barraged with letters and notes and etc. At the end of the day, what I remember was the fact that it was in Chicago played a big role. The majors had a big role. The price had a big role. They gave me some scholarships, and then also it wasn't. It was also still in Chicago, the big city part. It was still drastic because, again, I lived on the south side and that was the north side, but that was a big cultural shift as well. So that's why I picked that. Mm-hmm.
Did you live at home and commute to school?
So I lived at home, then went there. It was a long commute. I did live on campus for a little bit, but the dorms were disgusting. Disgusting. So then I lived at home for the most of that time, and then also I had friends that lived nearby, would stay with friends, etc. And then navigated still being Southside Chicago guy, and then hanging out with Northside intellectuals and whatnot.
What was your major? Did you immediately know you were going to move towards literature, or were you still contemplating math?
I wanted to be a writer always, and but I had no idea how to become a writer. So I was like, okay, Hemingway was a journalist first. Ring Lardner was a journalist first. Garcia Marquez was a journalist first. I'm like, I guess you're a journalist first. But I also like psychology. Again, being from the south side of Chicago, I also knew how to box. I had I wanted to get a black belt in Taekwondo. I took martial arts. So my goal would be to become a kickboxer. So I'm like, I'm going to be a kickboxing psychiatrist and maybe a writer. So I'm like, I chose the major of communications with a minor in journalism, thinking first I'll be a journalist and then a international literary figure. That was the goal. But always writing was part of that. And the minor in creative writing.
And did you imagine that you would be a practicing journalist after college?
Oh, I did not imagine anything practical post college. I had not really thought about jobs per se. and I did do a lot of different writing, which I was on the newspaper. I got published in the literary journal. I'd get published in the newspaper. I should add this too. I also made the news. Um, I remember I used to have a closed circuit radio show on campus, which is broadcast there. And I say all that because then I remember I'm like, I'm gonna have the mayor on my show, my little broadcast show. So he just got elected, and I would leave notes for his guard. They had guards in front of there. A cop would guard the place. I went up to the cop. I go, "Hey, what's going on?" He goes, "Hey, what's up?" I said, "I live over there." I go, "We know." I said, "All right." I said, "I want to interview Mayor Daley for my radio show." I left them the note, and he called me back, and he was on my radio show, and I started sending. I had internships at so it was DePaul University, again, the Catholic thing. The other reason too, it was a Catholic university. I don't think I was principally looking for that, but it had that thread. And then I had cool internships. Speaking of careers, I had an internship at a news radio station, which is really cool, WBBM. I had an internship at CBS Television, and then internship at a corporate place writing stuff for them. But I say that because at the TV and radio internships, I learned how press releases work, how media works. So then once I was putting that show together with the mayor, I sent out press releases and whatnot. And I got TV coverage, which was insane. So again, it really reminds me of that newsletter in grammar school. I'm like, this coding works. So I enjoyed that. But I had not really planned on the jobs afterwards. And then being in the newsroom, they were all telling me, "Guy, if you really want to do this, you're going to have to go to Iowa and work at $8 an hour." And I'm like, I ain't going to Iowa. I didn't come to college to get $8 an hour. So I was kind of not sure what I would do after college.
So it makes sense that in time you became a TV and radio personality, but you're also really good on the other side, generating media attention, knowing how to pitch a story, how to create a PR campaign. So you do have background in all of those things.
Exactly. And it's also through doing, and I think I've always learned that you do something at the educational institution, but also a lot more in community. And exactly, it was those internships, extracurricular stuff that planted the seeds for that. But also, it was perfect timing for the media era, social media era. And exactly, I'm a writer that's comfortable writing quietly for long periods of a time, planning to put other people in the spotlight, but also happy to pick up the mic and really enjoy that part as well. But I enjoy every single part of that as well.
So what happened when you graduated? What did you do right after that?
When I graduated, I had an internship at TransUnion. And I tell folks, if you haven't heard of that company, they've heard of you. They're the ones that are experts at credit history. And I had a job as a documentation specialist. Sounds fancy, but basically I was writing manuals on how to get people's credit information, and they would basically make money off it, and it was for the institution. I was miserable. And I think it was a high-paying job at the time. It wasn't what journalists would get. And I was really miserable. And I remember that I was thinking, okay, you know what? My dad had, at this age, he had kids to take care of, didn't speak the language, was in a country he didn't know, and he just went for it. I'm like, I've got a bachelor's degree, $2,000 in my bank account. I speak English great, no kids. I'm just going to see what I want to do outside in the world. I also had to eat my words because I remember when I was getting my bachelor's degree, I'm like, only suckers get master's degrees. Right? So then I'm like, maybe I should get a master's degree. And I had a creative writing teacher who was very formative with me, Professor Ted Anton. He had gone to the Iowa Writers Workshop, and he's actually the professor when I was a junior. He handed me a book that would wind up being the first book written by a Latino author that I would read. Because in my creative writing workshops, I wasn't writing about my background. And he would say to me, how come you're not writing about your family or your experiences? And I remember thinking, I'm like, well, you're not supposed to. I've never seen, I'm thinking that's not how it's done. And I'd never seen it. And he handed me a book, Down These Mean Streets by Piri Tamnes, a Boricua writer. And that blew my mind completely. I was like, wow, you can use Spanglish, use the urban landscape. You can write about things I thought you were taboo, whatever. Like, that's so cool. But I still didn't know how to become a writer. Then I started saying, you know what? Let me follow up on these creative writing programs. And I wound up applying and, wound up going 1 year to Kansas State University. I keep confusing University of Kansas with Kansas State University. No, my dear friends at University of Kansas, forgive me for mixing up the two. I went to Manhattan, Kansas for University of Kansas for 1 year for a master's of English with an emphasis on creative writing. And I was there for a year. And then after that, I applied for an MFA, for a studio degree. And what was cool is I got accepted by several programs, but Houston took me, which is where my parents were still. I'm like, I'm going back to Houston. And ironically, I didn't realize they had, I'm sorry. I lived in Chicago, abandoned my family for that 1 year, and then applied to the UH Creative Writing Program. They accepted me, and I thought, perfect, Manhattan, Kansas, there were some Latinos there, small town, and it wasn't a studio degree. So then there, music, the MFA program there was booming. It was rated #1. I'm like, I'm going down there. I'm going to take all my chivas down there, move my folks back to Texas. I want my base with me. They're like, we're down. It was too cold. The other thing I should mention is my folks at that age were very elderly. And the cold in Chicago was hard on them. They did miss me, and they said they had difficulties navigating, the English world. I believe them. Additionally, the house they had in Chicago, was 2 stories. And my mom had a hard time going down. So she had fallen down the stairs once as well. I say all this because I'm still that kid watching my family. So those concerns too, I'm like, you know what? Let's all go down to Houston, Traje todas mis chivas down to Houston, move them down here, and wound up enrolling in the UH Creative Writing Program. I became the first Chicano to get a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing. I really felt like a professional athlete. There was like a bidding war for me from some schools. So, University of Houston offered me a fellowship, which is different than a scholarship, which then is also different than a teaching assistantship. So I'm like, give me the money. And the other wild thing too is that I took all those benefits, signed the checks, accepted it. But it was also mind-blowing to me once I got to Houston. I'm like, they didn't say, hey, you'll be the first Chicano to get a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing. But I also had heard about and did research and knew about Arte Público Press in Houston, right there on University of Houston campus. I had heard about the Center for Mexican American Studies. When I went to check it out, I'm in San Antonio. I didn't come to San Antonio. I went to Houston. When I went to Houston to check it out, I remember watching TV and I saw Chicana poet Evangelina Vigil Piñon on TV. She was on Channel 3. I go, what the heck? They got poets on TV in Houston. So I literally thought like Houston would have like poets everywhere, right? I'm like, I got to get there. So once we relocated, everything started rolling. I had this cool time off before graduate school started. So I'm like, I'm going to do the cool stuff I wanted to do. And then I was ready to dive into the creative writing program. So that year, I finished a black belt in Taekwondo. I'd studied Shotokan karate before. I was a stringer for a small newspaper, which covered Sugarland and Stafford. And then I also did stand-up comedy. I got to do stand-up comedy. I learned that I should go to graduate school in creative writing because those other fields were either, didn't pay enough. Doing stand-up was really hard. And I will say for the record, I did performances for strangers in bars and I bombed, which was the most miserable feeling, but I survived. And I also rocked, which is the most exhilarating feeling ever, which also taught me like, I'm going to go for whatever it takes. My ego is in the end result, not in the moment, and also it's like, I get it. Whatever you see is still practice. I knew that from being a kid, but I'm like, I get it. Every performance is still practice in some way, shape, or form. I also found out that the University of Houston program was kind of that traditional ivory tower because I'd be telling people in Houston, yeah, I'm here to go to the creative writing program. They're like, what's that? I'm like, yeah, it's there at UH. They're like, really? I go, yeah, there's people naturally fighting each other to get in that program. I was like, we didn't know anything about it. I remember one young lady, we had a whole conversation until I realized she thought I said creative writing program. She thought I was talking about horseback riding, and I was like, no. And I realized there was a disconnect, so that part of me realized that the institution was disconnected. And for me, it was mind-boggling that they were importing Mexicans from Chicago and they were occupied Mexico. But that to me symbolizes the disconnect between institutions such as that and the community around them. And also how I break these codes. Like I also want to mention, as a throwback to affirmative action, I applied to 10 graduate programs because Arizona University had a program called Project 1000. And their goal was to get 1,000 Latino students, I forget what we were called at the time, maybe Hispanic students, into graduate programs. It was mostly business. And again, I kind of hacked it to say, well, hey, help me out. And they said, let's do it. And through that, I was able to apply to 10 programs, and they waived the fees to 10 programs. So I say all that because at that era, they wanted me at the time, right? And that was a big deal, which I think was key as well. But people forget about those sort of moments. And for me, it was fundamental in my formation and opening all those doors. And going to the University of Houston, I did learn all the wonderful things of the fine arts, but I always had my foot in the community. And I always knew that I wanted to build a bridge to that.
Now, you said earlier that you were not a Chicano yet when you were a young boy, and now it sounds like you are. When did that identity emerge and form?
The first time I heard about Chicanos was, of course, in Chicago. And I remember one of my cousins had a boyfriend who had a patch that said Chicano Power. And I thought it said Chicago Power. A lot of people hear Chicago, hey, that's cool. Chicago goes, no, that's Chicano Power. We started talking about it. I'm like, that sounds pretty cool. I actually had to go to University of Houston and start working with the Center for Mexican American Studies. So I'd heard about it in the formation. In Chicago, it wasn't in the schools, right? You'd hear about it in the community. And again, I also want people to understand I was great at English. I wanted to learn. I thought of myself as a writer. I did not have access to books by and about our community until I was a junior in college and a professor put one in my hands. And it wasn't like I didn't want to learn. I was actively looking for them. And our community doesn't have access to those as well. They have informal knowledge. You've got murals, but I never got together. It was at the University of Houston when I took electives in Mexican American literature. I remember finding Professor Maria Gonzalez, and then it started really landing. And then I started doing, digging deeper and reading a lot more works. But, some of the original works were, Bless Me Ultima, Tomas Rivera, the Chicano Manifesto. But it took graduate school for me to start researching that. And then starting to say, yeah, I get this powerful identity. I should also point out that in Houston, there were pockets of Chicanos at the time, but people should know that it wasn't as out there as it may be now.
And what kind of stories and voice emerged for you in your own writing as you were doing this MFA program, reading Chicano writers?
So for me, it was a big deal because it helped me write my thesis. So my thesis was a bunch of short stories where by that time I am working on my own voice, playing with different stories. I was writing fiction. And I remember my thesis, I had written a character, Teofilo Duarte, Tío, and then a plot, a different plot for something I call the Aztec Love God, right? And they were separate in separate short stories. And then for my thesis, I finished a collection of short stories. I was in that zone, though, right, looking for that. But I remember after graduating, I said, okay, these two, the character needs to be with that plot. And I'll fast forward a little bit. After I finished my MFA, I did work full time, but I couldn't teach. I worked full time, but I couldn't write. And then at that stage, at one point, I was actually teaching high school for a little bit. But at one point, I'm like, okay, I got this MFA. I'm working full time and writing a little bit. I need to switch that. And I quit and started writing, just working on that book. Again, I think that's my dad's, manos a la obra, let's go, So that I remember that year, I would, write 5 to 6 hours a day, submit it like a factory. I had short stories, essays, longer pieces on a rotation. Like I would put them all out, send it out, get the rejection letter. Doing stand-up writing prepared me for rejection. So after a while, I'm like, whatever, rejection, your loss, get notes. It was a little factory. But it was that full year working on the novel that would be called The Aztec Love God, which was my first novel with those characters. And I took that year to write it, but just constant writing, revisions, getting feedback from editors sometimes, workshops from a few writers I trust. Christopher Probst was a writer. I've lost touch with him. I would trust his feedback. Cliff Hutter is a fantastic fiction writer who I still trust now. A few other folks. Ironically, they're not Chicanos, ironically. And then other folks, that would help me. But then that led to the Aztec Love God, which I then submitted to a contest from the Fiction Collective 2. And I remember the judge was Ishmael Reed, who's a Black experimental writer. And I actually had a feeling, I'm like, oh, he's going to get me. Because I was actually, my character is Chicano, but I was writing experimental stuff as well. And I'm like, he's going to get it. And then he wound up picking my book for that contest. And part of it was money and getting it published. But it took me writing all that time alone. But it was formative, taking the MFA experience, what I learned about Chicanidad. And also, I want to stress too, I was in the community. So for example, even when I was in the creative writing program, there were no rules, but you could tell you weren't supposed to go to the journalism side. I couldn't help it. I'd go hang out with the journalists. You're not supposed to be in the Center for Mexican American Studies. I couldn't help it. Took the Mexican American Lit, and I'd be out in the community. So yes, I did writers in the schools, but then I also did new programs. I was the first one to lead a creative writing class at Multicultural Education and Counseling for the Arts, which is a Latino center. A place called Chicano Family Center. I wound up giving the first class. I was making history everywhere. Talento Bilingüe with Houston. I led the first creative writing class there, out in the community. And I also was helping different causes. So, for example, I was helping the Central American community. They were fighting for political asylum. So I would help them translate sometimes for their temporary protected status applications. But then, more importantly, I'd help the organizers of groups like Crescent with press conferences. Again, there's that journalism training. So I'd help them especially to reach the English media. So obviously I'd do it in Spanish, but they were experts at that. And then we helped each other because I'm like, then I learned, okay, here's the pockets of the Latino community, Central Americans, especially Guatemalans and Salvadorans, I helped them out. But then also they were helping me because it's like, okay, here's how you reach the media in Houston. And then I'd help them do outreach to the English media. And then I'd be the front for that.
So you leave graduate school, you work on your book. Who published The Aztec Love
The
God?
Fiction Collective 2.
Okay. In what year?
1998.
98. And you also immediately go into the community as a teacher, as a writer, and as an activist. Did you already consider yourself a literary activist, if you consider yourself that today? And how did you relate those two parts of your life, the writing and the activism?
Oh, I got my literary activist license now. I think I have it branded right here on back in big letters, and an eagle under there. Now it's clear. At the time, no, because at the University of Houston Creative Writing Program, again, I mean, I'm glad I went. I learned a lot about the fine arts world and that, but it's a racket. It's a racket. And I grew up in the south side of Chicago. I could see rackets. I recognize rackets. I got nothing against them. I get it. You got to do your thing, you know? And I can navigate in and out of them, right? But I also think that I also knew, no, I need to stay in touch with the community. I wanted to. I mean, even with my folks. And that's the other thing. To be fair to other students, I had my folks in the community as well, and I wanted them to. They loved it here. You know, Spanish everywhere, and it was warm, and so that was part of it as well. But I think for me, it was like being a little kid too. Parallel universes. You know, learning certain English but applying it elsewhere, but to be an A student at the University of Creative Writing Program, you want to finish your book, you want to get it published, you're supposed to go to New York and fight to get New York. But I'll say this and then get to the activism part. I'm also used to hacking systems. I'm like, I know what you want me to do. However, New York had too many hitmen, writers, and artists, you know. I'm like, and writers and everything. I'm like, why am I going to go over there and get in line? And same thing. It's just like the journalists were telling me, you got to go to Iowa and make $8 an hour. I go, I'm not going to go to New York and starve, you know? So I said, okay, I got a community here though. So I started working with the community. But I will say this, when I was in the creative writing program, I would do readings, and I actually remember hoping that someone would begin a Latino reading series, right? And I'm like, surely someone's gonna do this, you know? I sure hope someone does that, as I was doing my thing. But when my book came out, it was getting published. So now you have the creative writing student part, the professor part, the activist part, and then here comes the publishing part. It dawned on me that it was my job to create this this reading series that I was thinking about. And I had to pause because I'm like, it's going to take time from all this other stuff. And I analyze it, you know. But then I said, okay, I have to do this because I have all the tools. And that led to creating Nuestra Palabra, Latinos Having Their Say, in April of 1998 in Houston, Texas, which just turned 27 years old.
The same year you published your book.
The same year as the Aztec Love came out in 1998.
And what did Nuestra Palabra look like in that time? What did you guys do? Who was involved?
So I actually organized it, and it sounds like a template for what Nuestra Palabra is doing right like this day. I'm like, okay, I'm going to be doing all these book readings all over town in Texas and in different cities. Let me bring other writers here, and a few quick tools. I knew how to work, how media works. So at our first event, we had TV cameras, radio cameras, the newspapers came out. Here's a sad thing too, or a challenge. Fellow Latinos thought that there wasn't an audience for this. I get non-Mexican Americans, non-Chicanos to be like, oh, there's not enough interest. Our own gente had been programmed to think that we don't care about this, or there's not enough of us. And I remember them saying, no, people aren't interested. I go, well, you're interested, right? You go, well, I got people to come. Feel free not to go. We're doing this. Because the other thing is, even writers would be like, there's not enough writers. I had taught enough classes in the community where I'm like, there's a demand. And I'm like, oh, wait, I've created writers. I'm like, you know what? If there's not enough writers, I'll just keep making more. So the template was, I'm going to promote my book as the published author and the host. And let me bring in some journalists like Russell Contreras was there at the first one. He was a student at University of Houston, also in the media, helping us get media attention. He loved writing as well. I'm like, here's a journalist. Alvaro Sarios was one of my classes at the time. And I'm like, dude, you're reading at the first event. He's now got an MFA. He's making money off his plays. And I said open mic as well, in English and Spanish and Spanglish. And we did it at the Party Hall of Chapultepec restaurant. The other interesting thing, too, is that even Houston has its own blinders. Because I organized it in Montrose. And then and it reminds me totally of what people were telling my dad. Like, hey, Don Antonio, you're supposed to be over here. And my dad said, no, I'm going over here. People were telling me that I needed to organize it in the traditional perceived Latino neighborhood, Mexican-American neighborhoods, which are wonderful neighborhoods. But they're like, because there's no Latinos in Montrose. And we would hang, Montrose was it's known as the base for the LGBTQ community, but there's artists there and raza everywhere. So I'd be there and I'm like, you don't see? And that's kind of wild because they weren't seen. So it was there and we organized the Party Hall Chapultepec restaurant and it was a big hit from the beginning. But I still didn't know it. I didn't know it'd be a 27-year experience. It's the model we follow, a published author, community, new writers, and kind of all that mixing in together.
Did you have funding at the beginning, or how did it work organizationally?
I had applied for a grant from it's now called the Houston Arts Alliance. I think then it was called Catch. And it was to fund this. And I remember they rejected me. And it got me so mad. I mean, with una rabia. I'm like, are you kidding me? So I said, you know what? I'm going to do it without the money. So zero money, what I call community culture capital. And we just did it with community culture capital at that time. And it was this hit. It was a big hit at the time because it was needed. And that was exciting as well. I will say this too. Destiny was on our side in many ways. Like just some of the, Carolina Monsiváis would go on to get her PhD. Isis Rojas Fernandez, she now has an MFA. We just did her book in Houston to launch that book as well. Some of the early writers are now in the Latino poetry anthology edited by Rigoberto Gonzalez, who we've had in Houston. But several writers in there were unpublished before they got published in there. Jasmine Mendez was writing about Afro-Latino issues. way before she's in that anthology and other books. So I say it because, all that was so cool. But I think the wild thing was that on our first anniversary, we took the model to the next level because Edward James Olmos, who is famous for playing Selena's father in that film, he had a book come out, Americanos, Latino Life in the United States, and it was on our 1-year anniversary. So he was the published author that we built a show around. And it was exciting because he brought media attention, but we accelerated that. And it was pandemonium. But another sign that we were doing the right thing at the right time and sticking to our guns.
So you were nurturing new voices and writers outside of the structures of the elite MFA programs, which historically have not had a lot of writers of color or Latino writers. Within a few years of that, you end up coming to San Antonio to the Macondo Writers Workshop, correct? Can you share about that?
So, of course, I had read Sandra's work, was a fan, loved it. And I'm trying to remember, I think we hosted her at Nuestra Palabra first. I think we did. And I remember we're having a late night dinner afterwards somewhere. I remember 2 things from that conversation with Sandra. One, she was awesome. So I loved that she performed and went over the top with the performance, right? And I'm like, that's cool. I want to model that. And then I remember 2 things. One, I was trying to get healthy at the time, so she told me about her trainer and how to eat healthy, right? And that stuck too. But then also she talked about Macondo. She said, you need to come. And that sounds awesome, especially after the MFA program, because it was shortly after the MFA program that I started Nuestra Palabra. But that was huge because it's a counter narrative to the MFA program. And I've had the benefit of both. And I also love that for Macondo, first when I went as a writer. But everybody there has the same experience where we're activists in the community who are informed by our writing. And that's the powerful part of that filter. We touch everything with that sensibility. And here among this awesome group of people, intellectuals, they thought of me as a writer. And, as is the case, outside of there, people think of me either, oh, you're the host of this, or, I had done radio, TV, oh, you're the guy from TV, you're from the radio show. No one really fathoms all our facets, and they would forget I'm a writer, which is fine. But at the end of the day, I do all this because I'm a writer. And Macondo was profound in that. I got to take writing workshops early with Luis Rodriguez, Denise Chavez, both are dear friends now. And then even going back as a chuparrosa, which means, you've completed the program, but you kind of go back, brainstorming when talking to folks about ideas for Nuestra Palabra, bringing writers, being informed. You're smarter about the ecosystem of writing because you're meeting the writers and telling you about writings and getting to talk to them before their books come out, because that's another model Nuestra Palabra. We focus on books that are coming out. I should mention too that right now Nuestra Palabra is at the stage where we're a bookstore and people can go online, but then we do pop-ups, but it's based on released titles. So that was key to see that model. And then kind of going back to our early Nuestra Palabra days. But, Macondo fueled all of that, giving us a pipeline to writers. And then also social justice issues. I can get into all the other movements that help fuel the Librotraficante movement. Even us during, immigration issues and all that. It's been a powerful boom for all those things. But I could trust it because everybody there knows the fine arts and aesthetics, but I can trust their insights because they also know our community. And I think that's the part that was missing at the UH creative writing or any creative writing program.
Tell us about the Librotraficante movement. In fact, your name is Tony Diaz, El Librotraficante.
That's correct.
It's a central part of your identity now.
No, thank you. Yes, Tony Diaz, El Librotraficante, which means book smuggler. Well, in 1998, Arizona legislators passed a law that prohibited Mexican American Studies in Arizona. It was a statewide law. It passed. But there were three tenets behind it. One was that it banned courses that promoted the overthrow of the government. And this was based on a curriculum founded by Tucson teachers. It was the gold standard of ethnic studies. So you had these high school students studying the books I couldn't get in high school. And that had transformed the dropout rate. Previous, they had the double-digit dropout rates you find in common in most urban areas. Once the students took that curriculum, they started hitting a 98% graduation rate. But instead of extolling it, they prohibited it. I and 4 veteran members of Nuestra Palabra, Brian Parras, Lupe Mendez, Laura Razo, and Liana Lopez, heard about that in Houston. And it is hard to get books to our community. I think people can tell you got to get outside the system to find them. You have to cultivate them. And only then can we present them. And that's hard. And then to get them in the classrooms is even harder. Well, if they ban it, we knew in Houston, one, it was personally offensive. And secondly, it's going to make it harder for students to get access to those books, and they need to. The only reason I can do all this is because it was formative to me, and I was interested in the curriculum anyway. I needed that to further push me. So we were then mad, and we said, what do we do? So we had the radio station at the time. I did the radio show for about 20 years. A little after that, I would wind up being on TV. I would be on the show on Fox 26 Houston, debating live with far-right individuals. Of course, I'm a progressive. And so we'd argue live on TV about issues. I say all that then because kind of like the same thing as Nuestra Palabra, I didn't know we'd organize a caravan. I came up with the word Librotraficante before. We had been doing these huge blockbuster book festivals in Houston, the Latino Book and Family Festival from 2002 to 2009. That drew at its peak 30,000 people to the George R. Brown Convention Center. And again, all those tactics we use, media, etc. Sandra was there at one point, a lot of literary writers, Dagoberto Gil, literary writers. But then we also have like George Lopez, Cheech Marin, right? And I remember coining the phrase because it was glamorous. But then afterwards, we'd be there at the George R. Brown Convention Center in dark alleys with making boxes. And I remember thinking, we look like we're trafficking something. We're Librotraficantes if the police come. So I coined the phrase. And then, we had this team of organizers who were experts. So it was the 5 of us, they all had 10 years experience. By the time they're banning ethnic studies in Arizona, they had 10 years experience. Lupe did do Macondo. Brian and Liana had been visiting to Macondo as well. But we said, let's organize. I remember Brian Para sent a tweet that the Librotraficantes are creating a caravan of the banned books. And I was like, are we doing that? Like, we're doing that. And I was like, but we paused. And I paused too. I'm like, are we really doing this? And it's like, we're doing this. But we launched it on the radio show. And our network was all the writers who were banned. Sandra Cisneros was banned. Dagoberto Gil was banned on that curriculum. So we were able to activate all that. But also go to different spots like Macondo and accelerate all that community cultural capital to create a pushback.
So you had not just a caravan, but an epic road trip.
Exactly.
In 2012. Tell us about what that entailed.
So we organized a 6-city tour of taking the banned books in this bus. Of course, we had zero funding. Like the bus, probably about 4 days out, we didn't even have the bus yet. Okay, all right. But we're doing it on bikes, in chanclas, on cars, whatever. We did get the bus finally. And the idea was to visit what would turn out to be the pockets of Chicano culture. Like, we still have the map at librotraficante.com. Very simple website. You can see the map. But that is the traces the evolution of Chicano literature. So then it's like, okay, we're going to follow pockets of resistance, which means San Antonio, where Sandra was, to the Guadalupe Cultural Arts Center. Sandra donated books and funding. Also, we went on to
Las Cruces.
Las Cruces. We visited Denise Chavez, again, a dear friend. We stopped there. Rodolfo Anaya. All these legacy stops as well. El Paso, all the way back to Tucson. But it was opening underground libraries. We still have those underground libraries that are alive. Getting the books to Tucson, but also drawing attention to get the word out to the media that this was happening so that the students will get support as they try to fight that law. They're the real heroes because they were the ones suing, but we want to draw the attention. I say that because, there's so many stories on it. Right now, as I say this, there are folks that will hear about this for the first time. And I need to say, every time I have a chance to say, during our lifetime, our culture was banned in the United States of America. However, we all united and behind these students overturned that law. And I'm saying this, you mentioned the date at the beginning, where there's a censorship culture right now that's making it harder to get those books. I will say this, though, because of our work at that time, Mexican-American studies and Chicano literature will not be directly banned ever again because we will rise up to the occasion and solve that. However, in this current censorship culture, it is making it harder for our community to get their hands on books by our people, for our people. So I don't want to be too glib about it, but that was a powerful stand right there. And it was wonderful because we all united with social media, mainstream media, independent media to spread the word. And we all galvanized with allies, and it was overturned.
It's incredible to think you've spent decades working to build literary communities, to build literary voices, to develop access to books. And now we're in a moment where some of those things can not be undone, but just it's getting harder to do that. Does it feel that way on the ground where you're working?
Yes, and I actually talk about in my book, The Tip of the Pyramid, Cultivating Community Cultural Capital. When I wrote that book, still in an experimental vein, so I talk about the caravan. I've archived the Caravanistas, where we stopped. That's in there. And I have middle chapters for the essays that I wrote at the time. I do want to go back to Macondo and myself as a writer, because to write that book, I had 1 year where I gave myself a challenge of writing an essay a week to figure out what that book would be. And going back further, my first novel was fiction. During the Librotraficante caravan, I would write essays and I can't remember if I did 80 interviews in English, Spanish, and Spanglish for that. I wrote several essays, nonfiction. I stopped writing fiction though, because I'm like, this is like a dystopian novel that we're living, where our people are organized and we're smuggling books. It's like this, this is contraband. This is mind-altering prose. I said I can't make it up, and I stopped writing fiction, and I started writing nonfiction. At that time, the year, and I would come back always to Macondo as a writer to get support. Macondistas helped tremendously in many ways, but then also I came here writing a lot. So every year I'd come back, and as a Macondista, would have that week off to write my butt off, and I would. I am, even right now. But at that time, the year was writing an essay a week and I remember talking to Stephanie Grista Lizando too about our format. And we chatted because I was stuck. She's like, you got to look at Gloria Anzaldua's work. And I'm like, wow, it's under my nose. He's my hero. And she writes nonfiction too. And I'm like, that helped me format my book. And I say all that though because I quantified it. But what I say in there is I didn't want to write, I call it a lowercase b book, which is a product. My book is a capital B book because it's not a product. It's a living organism. And I didn't want to write about the caravan or bans as if we'd solved it. Because clearly these attacks on intellectual freedom are on decade cycles. But the folks that oppose intellectual freedom have the resources, time, and energy and desire to plan at 10-year clips clearly. And we had addressed that decade, but it's coming, and they study us. And they study Librotraficante, The Dreamers, Black Lives Matter, Occupy. They study that and they respond, and they did. I didn't know how they would respond. We know now, which was in Texas to take over entire legislatures, do supermajorities, and start to legislate away some of the work we did. They started attacking DEI, critical race theory as the boogeyman. So they wasn't the boogeyman of, you know, this curriculum is promoting the overthrow of the government like they used in 2012. A similar tactic. And instead of banning books, which they realized we can respond to, they started coming up with laws that could ban entire curriculums. And right now we're at the stage where they've bullied librarians, they've fired librarians, they've put a cold chill on every single school level with new laws. And in other words, they've sufficiently bullied librarians. They've made it harder to get books in the libraries. But now libraries are being defunded, which I never thought would even be imagined. In major Texas cities, to reach gaps in funding, they're closing libraries. Right now, as I speak, there's 17 school districts that overlap Houston. Several of them don't have libraries or working librarians, which is a travesty. Houston Independent School District, I haven't checked the rest, they had turned their library into the detention centers. Very symbolic name as well. I won't go further into that because that affects the high school level. And right now at the university level, there's a defunding of university research, a chill on curriculum. The federal government is inspiring going through curriculums to eliminate certain names for courses and majors. Long story short, I need to say right now that I am an intellectual and give back to the community to cultivate all voices. But I had teachers at each level that inspired me. I could probably, in grammar school, it was the librarian that would hand me books. It made me feel special and told me that I was a thinker. And here's your books, Antonio. I read all the books that were born. She goes, here's one you'll like the Chocolate Wars, 6th grade, blew my mind. She put that in my hands. I think that's banned in a few places now, the Chocolate Wars. High school, brother Thomas. You know, I don't know why I got into the research for this report on Napoleon. I was skipping lunch to be in the library, and I remember he came up to me and goes, "Hey, Antonio, I really admire how you're doing this research. You're a real scholar, so I want to give you this book." And he gives me a book of Napoleon. He goes, it's for your family library. And I didn't have the heart to tell him that my family didn't have a library, but I will say this. Now, whenever I buy a house, I get un carpintero to build a beautiful bookcase, and I have my family library, and that book's in there. And at the higher education level, Ted Anton might not be there now as a junior to hand me that book as a junior. First Latino book I read. If it was harder for me then to get books, and I'd like to think I'm tough enough and brilliant enough and cool enough to become an intellectual on my own, if one of them is missing, maybe if two of those folks are missing, if all three are gone, as is the case right now, I don't know if I would be who I am. But I'm saying this at Macondo. So I'm glad that I get to be part of this oral history project, which is powerful. Dr. Maggie is behind it, which is powerful. I get to convene with my brothers and sisters, which is powerful. We get to tell our story, which is powerful. So I'm not going to leave people depressed. I'm not going to bring us down. Right now, Nuestra Palabra is not just the bookstore online. That's our front. In 2024, we were named the Houston Cultural Treasure, which came with funding, which we invested to open our first office. We did a rebranding. We use these words now. If you go to our website, it's beautiful. It's set for e-commerce. We want to be people's favorite bookstore, but we're not just a bookstore with products. Only books by writers who we work with. It's that same Nuestra Palabra thing. We bring you to Houston. We build tours throughout Texas. The difference is we go to the people. And that means not just fancy readings like the Museum of Fine Arts Houston, Alley Theater. We go to taco shops, beer joints, ink parlors. We just did a reading yesterday for Arnie, Texas at Jaime's place here, which is cool, honky tonk bar. Maybe I'm trying to translate that for folks, which was a huge hit. But also, that's a cookbook. That's political because we want people at this stage right now, it's vital for people to love the food but respect the culture. And I want to make one thing clear. For folks that buy books from us, their support for every cent they buy, it costs more to buy a book off us than that other place that you buy books online. You pay a few bucks more, you get the book a little later, but you're helping Latino writers, Latino publishers, and you're helping us give back to the community. And we still fund underground libraries. So we ask people to give classroom sets. And I will say this, we have different kinds of underground libraries. During the Librotraficante caravan, we told people where they were. Right now, we've got underground libraries that we will not tell you where they are. And we have overground underground libraries. It's hard to get into some schools, so we'll work with the county library across the street from the high school. We'll work with community organizations that are in the schools, and we'll give them the books. And they do paperwork or whatever to manage it. We'll give classroom sets to teachers as individuals so that they can use them however they like. But it is right now, the attack on intellectual freedom is a very real thing, but we still have the power of family libraries and underground libraries. And it goes back to the same gift of Macondo. As the formal institutions implode or cannot deliver, we cannot rely on, it's these community organizations that have served us for 30 years, Nuestra Palabra for 27 years. And again, the Chicano movement for decades, ethnic studies for decades. That's the beautiful part of this movement, and I get to reflect on that in Macondo.
And how does this all relate to your main argument in the tip of the pyramid? You want to share a bit of what your essays are arguing?
The main argument about community cultural capital is that when people experience, say, a book, they must imagine it as the tip of this pyramid. And then they must then unearth more of the history and culture. And I say that because I think when people from outside our community delve into our community, they see the tip of this profound pyramid, and I named some of it. Pyramid's this book. Well, it's this genre of writers. It's this history of writing. It's Nuestra Palabra. It's Macondo. It's the Chicano legacy. It gets deep. And people outside of our community, they think they're dabbing their toe in a puddle. And they're like, I'm going to invest this week and find out all about it. And the more they put their toe in it, it gets deeper and overwhelming. And then they're like, we're going to stop. I think the metaphor is important because then it also pushes us to quantify. And in my own work, I've actually quantified dots. Literally, like, okay, here's the banning of ethnic studies in Arizona. The tip of the pyramid, instead of just talking about a book, the tip of the pyramid was overturning. When the students overturned that law in Arizona, that was the tip of a pyramid because we had the resources, intellectual capacity to do that. And I like the metaphor then because it forces us to quantify the community cultural capital in that data point. But it is living in organic. I say that then because right now I'd say what the forces against community cultural capital have done is they saw that data point and they've put layers of dirt over it, right? They said, okay, we see that, we're blocking it. But the next thing is that there's always these fissures in their cement, always. And the fissures are, in one part of the metaphor, the fissures are down here in the pyramid, and we say, oh, look, it's Nuestra Palabra. Oh, look, it's Macondo. But there's a lot. We decide to call it something, and it is powerful. I say all that now because the system has said, you're getting powerful through schools, layer. You're getting powerful through laws, layer. But we haven't been erased. So the last thing I'll say about the idea then is to quantify it. It's like a map to say, right now, we are in a building moment. We should not be Desanimados or dissuaded, it looks bleak, but it's a 10-year cycle, and it's not time to build, which is why spaces like Macondo are vital, because it's going to help me. Let me get my homework. I'll tell you my homework. This year, I'm writing 3 essays a week. That's my challenge that I've stuck to. I count fine arts and fine policy. So when I'm writing grants, I count those as essays because they are. I don't play. When I've paid grant writers, and they're terrible. No offense to the, I write those grants and they work. Why? Because I'm a poet who writes prose, and I believe in fine arts and fine policy. I'm here not just to write my 3 essays per week, but I'm talking to all the folks here about all this and forming the next layer of work as we convene together. And that is also, the book is living, because I describe some of it, but this is saying, no, we have to keep adding to that.
As we wind down, I just don't want to neglect a couple other areas of your life. We know you most as a writer, as a literary activist, but you've also been a teacher, a professor. You're a professor at Lone Star College and previously at various other schools in Houston. So can you just share a bit about what it's been like teaching young people, nurturing voices and critical thinking?
I should point out I had never intended it, right? In fact, when I was in graduate school, first time at the University of Kansas, at Kansas State University. I think I did get it is Kansas State University in Manhattan, whichever one's in Manhattan, Kansas. They told me I'd be a teaching assistant, which I thought I'd be helping a professor, grade papers or whatever. And then when I showed up, they said, well, here's the workshop. Bring your syllabus at the next one. I'm like, why would I bring my syllabus? It's like, well, yeah, you're teaching the class. I was like, holy cow. So I say all that because I'm like, oh my gosh, right? But I enjoyed it. And I think because I have the passion for it, I was able to excel at it. I say all that then because, now I've probably been a professor for 20-something years. And it parallels Nuestra Palabra and Macondo, because when I teach a course, I don't play, and that's what I tell the students. I'm like, y'all going to ask me how I use this in the real world. You're going to see this. You're going to be part of it, so that when I'm teaching the class, the most recent class I had, it was a composition course. It's rhetorical analysis. It's rhetorical analysis at Lone Star College. It was a book Detained on immigration, but my students got to experience it before it was officially released. They didn't have to buy the book. I got them galleys of the copy, advanced readers copy. So they learned about that. The book is about a young man who was detained during the first Trump administration. And of course, I teach at community colleges that are urban. Typically, my students are either Black or Latinx, right? And they loved the book, even if they were not Latino. What's my point? My point is that doing what I do has helped me make my courses relevant. I've been able to defy all the stereotypes where people think urban youth are not motivated or care about literature. Just like those Tucson students demanded their books back that were taken away from them in courses. The students I work with, they embrace this. And I think it's been powerful for them to get top-notch education where they're meeting contemporary writers who are active. Some of them then go to the showcases for the launch of the Latino Poetry Anthology. Some of the students from Lone Star College read their works there as well, which was huge for them. They got to perform in front of school board members, principals, and folks from the community. Really cool things. I mentioned on the Nuestra Palabra side, on the student side, one of my students, Danny Mesa, a very young man, just became a board of trustee for Lone Star College. So he told me to go to his inauguration. I had the honor of going there, and it was wonderful to say, here at Lone Star College, we train our students to become our bosses. So for me, it's been a powerful way to link all of that. Mm-hmm.
And finally, somehow you find the time to also be involved in many organizations in Houston. And one common thread is a uplifting Latino voices in the arts. You're a board member with the Museum of Fine Arts Houston and with Alley Theater, if I'm correct. Can you share about that experience?
No, thank you for asking about that. I will also point out, yes, member of LULAC Council 60. I'm on the Mayor's Hispanic Advisory Board for Houston. I've helped Alley Theater, Museum of Fine Arts Houston with the Latino Advisory Committees. But I think right now, what I like is I'm at this interesting era where I guess I'm an elder statesman of sorts, right? Which is wild. And then I've served as a consultant for different places, including the Guadalupe Cultural Arts Center for the Latino Bookstore. I'm on the board of the BIPOC Arts Network and Fund, which was awarded funding from the Ford Foundation. That's been powerful too, because it's almost like Macondo, but on a little more civic side and quantifying community cultural capital. So they've been infusing money into the community, and that's powerful because it is applying theories that I talked about in the tip of the pyramid, cultivating community cultural capital, but helping them quantify the community to award funding to our community, Black, Indigenous, people of color groups. Also, I helped ALMA, ALMAAHH, which is an organization that is trying to will create a multidisciplinary arts complex for our community. Not just one building, not just a museum, but for all the arts. But I co-wrote with Heraldina and Tirano Wise a grant that got $1 million from the Houston Endowment just for intellectual capacity to imagine that. But again, it's taking the work from Nuestra Palabra, Macondo, and also the theoretical underpinnings of the tip of the pyramid to apply that. And one thing that I am excited about is even with ALMA, what we're about to engender now, I hope that by 2030, we've opened this multi-genre complex. Not one building, several acres. And right now we're kicking off an entire department, I'll be head of this committee, to examine identity. And the idea would be to quantify that in different ways, because that's integral to this arts movement, but also gives us this intellectual underpinning and concrete underpinning to say, well, here's why we're making these decisions. So to me, I went from workshopping poems to workshopping cities, and that's the power of this field and what we do.
I want to correct myself. I've said board member. You've been on the Latino Advisory Committees of those organizations. So do you still write any poetry?
So I consider myself a poet that's dedicated to prose and writes 300-page books. I do. I don't really I don't share it or read it out loud. You can't keep me quiet on the prose side. I will say this, though. When I'm using word or sentences, I want to pack a punch. And I want to write sentences that had not have been imagined. So to me, I load up the prose with lines that could be in a poem. And what I like about poetry is that it's the impact of a word outside of the benefit of all this context. And part of me is like, but if I can use it, in that context, it's loaded up. And to me too, I don't like to cave in and say the word soundbite. And when I've done TV and I've had producers say, you got great sound bites. I'm like, no, I have great poetry. I got great poetry and bars and lines. I'm not here to give you sound bites. I'm here to delight. So to me, that's the application of it. Do I still write poems? I don't know. When I'm on TV, I drop a phrase or two. The word Librotraficante, that's poetry. And ultimately, yes, I write fine arts, but I've written some fine policy, and in there are some lines of poetry that are infecting public policy.
Thank you. Is there any other part of your life or your work that you'd like to discuss that I haven't asked you about?
I'd like to just say, too, I am happy to be a family man, happily married 28 years as of 3 days from now, from this interview. Father, my parents are deceased now, but I should say I have paused along the way and made decisions and said, hey, you know what? I do have a lot to do. It's important. And I may say this for other activists. I need to stop and pause and go to this young man's debate. I need to pause and go play catch with this young man today. Why? Because I love it. And that also defines me. And ultimately, all these hard concrete structures are ephemeral and they're illusions that we play over versus, I'm going to be around my wife, my sons forever. I want to dedicate time to that. And also the other thing I'll add for our fellow writers, I've gone out of my way to stay healthy. So I try, I work out, I eat right, I say all that because a lot of guys my age are getting diabetes. I've had friends who get strokes. I remember that chat with Sandra. It was some diner in Houston, and we were having salad, and I'm like, I'm not going to eat. And she goes, here's how you should eat to get energy, because food's not the enemy. And I was like, wow. And diabetes tears the Chicana community apart. We need to fight. We need to face that so that we can continue telling our stories. And I think in closing is that I don't have to be the activist at the forefront anymore. I do want to contribute in this way, kind of that legacy, and maybe formulate some more intellectual underpinnings that are not on TV, on social media, or media that we still need, and save them in spaces like that, forever, for eternity.
That's a wonderful way to close, but I want to close by closing the loop and returning to that memory you have when you were young and you published your first poem and you got attention from the teachers and the adults and people responded and took you seriously. And you said, this is fascinating. What is fascinating to you after a lifetime of writing? What is fascinating about being a writer?
I think it is the power to recognize destiny, the power to impose our will on the universe, the power to keep ourselves humble. And it is magical to still see moments where like, wow, our voices matter. And it's so many different things, like just walking into this room, saying hi to, so many folks. Dr. Madrid, I know some people have had him for class. It's wonderful to count him as a mentor, friend, and colleague, and look at his work and say how fulfilling. But I saw him yesterday at Jaime's place here in San Antonio. And I would also argue that the magic never ends because, Nuestra Palabra is many things now. I've learned that we can share the burden of fighting for civil rights, and we have to. So from my friends who can be honest with me and set me straight when I need it, I've also learned, oh gosh, we can't do it ourselves. We shouldn't. It's irresponsible for us to say we're going to fight all these civil rights issues ourselves. We have partners, and I've seen that through Macondo, Banff, and now we can spread that, and I don't feel the burden of fighting as many fights at once. And Nuestra Palabra can be that bookstore in some ways, but we still have techniques. So I want to say, because last night was delightful, it was exhausting. We're helping Arnie Segovia launch his book tour cookbooks, which are not traditional fine arts. So your typical bookstore or writer wouldn't deal in cookbooks because it's not traditional fine arts. But what a powerful way for people to love our food and respect our culture. And we're booksellers. But you wouldn't see your traditional bookseller at a bar on the West Side. But yesterday we broke records. We sold about 153 books, which is a lot for that book. And we're probably going to sell 1,100 copies of that book overall. And I say it, though, because each book sale is me as that kid getting published under. I remember, too, I should also point out, it was thrilling to see my name under the hot lunch menu for Sloppy Joe's. And I still get that same feeling at Jaime's when a family comes up and we tell them, this is a wonderful part of your family library, and this is going to be the story. You're not buying the book, you're buying the story. That still is exciting because I know that together we wouldn't do it, and what I really love being able to continue. And then the next day, come to do this interview and come to my friends here in Macondo, which also makes it easier to give an extra day to that book tour.
Thank you for a wonderful interview, Tony.
My pleasure. And if you're listening to this, you are now a Librotraficante.